he really brings a wealth of his personal story and narrative, like what he went through. He's been involved with the Bertha Center for Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which worked with Investec. He was a speaker and was featured in their leadership conference. He's the co-director of Biomimicry SA. And Biomimicry is a firm with over 25 years of experience and hundreds of global corporate partners who want to learn this art. Examples of which are Procter & Gamble, Colgate Palmolive, Microsoft, Ford, Hyundai, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and many, many others, Unilever, etc. He works actively and trains co-entrepreneurs and others in this field to, in my mind as he speaks, I literally visualize our buildings and our roads and our cities. I visualize them like transforming from concrete into like these perfect architectural wonders of just like natural plants and green earth and moss, and you know what I mean? Can you just imagine like this imaginary world where the building around you, like roots of trees just start climbing up the side of the walls, and like the building just becomes this haven of nature. And this is what you experience when you're engaging Semprini. Semprini has done a lot. He's a student completing his master's degree. But interestingly, he started out as a mechatronic engineer, and he was involved in the mechanical design and engineering of deep sea mining and the oil and gas industry. And interestingly, like many of our guests, he realized the negative impacts. A big case that we all know that I also teach is the BP oil spill case. And he witnessed these and he said, this is not for me. And so he became a hippie and a philosopher. And he went out on a journey and he traveled and thought through the purpose of life, which is one of the big pluses of this episode, is that you get an inside view of somebody who deeply cares about this world and walks away from a cushy job and spends a year traveling, trying to figure out what to do with this feeling that they have and make it a part of the future of their life. So him and a couple of people bought a farm and stayed on the farm and tried to practice regenerative agriculture, which was a big lesson for him because it sort of failed. Right? And it's important to learn from failures as much as we learn from successes. From all of this, he ended up in biomimicry, a fascinating science, a fascinating philosophy and way of life that Semprini embodies in every single way. Ladies and gentlemen, today's guest on the Jet Voices podcast is none other than Stefano Semprini. Enjoy.
Welcome aboard our jet. The Just Energy Transition is a new podcast with the goal of amplifying the stories that matter most. Our mission? A just energy transition, raising the voices of untold inspiring stories. At Jet, we hope every listener becomes a true activist and every story a catalyst for real change.
Steph, welcome to the Just Energy Transition podcast. Welcome to the Jet. We are about to embark on a first-class flight into the world of biomimicry. How are you feeling today?
Thank you, Andani. Thank you for welcoming me so beautifully. It's really good to be here. I'm really looking forward to this. It's a beautiful, beautiful day in Cape Town. Down on the southern end of the peninsula. The locals like to call it Deep South. And it's a place called Murdoch Valley North outside Simonstown. I'm based here in a little cottage. I look out my window on the right, and there's a zeri-scaped garden and a rock with a lot of sunlight on it. And just beyond that is the ocean. My octopus teacher was filmed just down the road here.
Show us. Is this possible?
It is.
I would love to see.
There you go. That's the view. Can you see? Yeah.
So that award-winning Netflix documentary, my octopus teacher, was filmed right down there.
Yeah, it was. We regularly go diving in the very same water.
An octopus?
I've seen other octopi. Did you know that there are 3 legitimate plurals for octopus? They're all legitimate.
So that speaks to your intellectual bent. Now, people who are crazy and mad about the just energy transition or the just transition in general, even if in its social dimensions. So what is the craziest thing that you have recent energy transition? What is the craziest thing? Because that is what is going to earn you a spot on this podcast. So let's go. What is it?
Oh God. I'd have to say what's feeling pretty crazy at the moment is this 10, 15-year journey that I've been on trying to understand the root causes of what's going on in the world. And I think the whole thing, it's not one thing that's crazy. It's every step that I take one after the other, because, my journey down the path that I'm on began when I was 21 in university, and they start to tell you that your engineering thesis that you're going to do is really going to be part of what defines the direction of your career. It's where you start specializing. So think good and proper about what you're going to do your thesis on. And my thesis about my thesis was, look, I care about this become a bit of a funny word for some people, but I care about empowerment on the African continent. I care about people finding their own way to create the kinds of lives they want on the African continent. I know from my own experience, because I was very disillusioned with my electronic engineering at Stellenbosch University.
Mechatronic, what is that? What is, I don't know what that is.
Mechatronics
what
is
that? Go back to the...
Absolutely. It's a combination of electrical, electronic, and mechanical engineering with a focus on automation, so control systems, robotics, that kind of thing.
Okay, so you were exploring massive open online courses, yes?
Yeah, and I'd done a lot of them, and I realized, cool, if people want to have the self-directed learning that they can create their own future with, you need access to the internet. Access to the internet requires access to electricity. Access to electricity is not going to happen through massive centralized energy grid. It's going to happen with renewable energy. Okay, then I need to go into renewable energy. So I saw that as the key to unlock the thing that I actually wanted to be working on. And so I applied to, that was the time when the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program was going through its first or second bidding window in South Africa, and I applied to every single one of those companies that had won projects in the first round, and it was massively oversubscribed. I mean, they chose 14 out of 96 projects that applied to that, and unfortunately, it's one of these things where a lot of these companies, they weren't looking for junior engineers, they weren't looking for graduates, they're looking for experienced project managers to run these big projects. Unfortunately, you have a lot of these European companies that can set up these projects on balance sheet. It was a reverse auction process, so those companies can charge a lower rate, cents on the kilowatt hour than the local companies, and so you had a lot of these international companies winning those projects, unfortunately. And so I didn't get into renewable energy. I ended up working in mechanical engineering for 2 years for my sins, bit of a know thy enemy situation. And then the renewable energy thing never left my mind, and so then I finally quit on principle. That's a whole other story, in 2014. And one of those things, providence, the universe provides. It was a synchronicity. I ended up meeting a guy who was the first member of a local team of a Dutch startup called Solaris, who were bringing a very unique solar panel to market. So it's a hybrid solar panel. We were based out of Cape Town. The head office was in the Netherlands. So Gunther Pauli wrote this book, The Blue Economy, which is 100 solutions that are good for business and good for the planet. And this particular solar panel was one of the solutions featured in his book, and Gunther Pauli had hooked up the professors who were developing this solar panel in a lab in Sweden with some investors, and they moved the production to the Netherlands with the view to really kind of scale up the production of this hybrid solar panel. And because going to so then got back into the renewable energy game, and I did that for 2 years. And it was during that time.
I want to jump in here. So if I'm getting it correctly, your fancy engineering degree, your complex engineering degree, and then you finished, but you empowered yourself with additional education, massive open online courses, and you kind of followed this, intuitive inspiration towards making the world a better place. And so you decided you want to go into renewable energy, and you applied. You used this program. Just quickly say it again. What was it? The full acronym?
The REI4P is what is as close as you can get to abbreviating. It's the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program. It was a reverse auction program where the government of South Africa said, we want to procure X amount of renewable energy from solar, wind, biomass, etc. And you tell us how many rand cents per kilowatt hour you need to make your project financially viable, and we'll choose the top of the community-based upliftment programs that the project team or the company was committing to in the vicinity of where they were going to set up their renewable energy.
You work in that, I believe, 2 years, right? You did work in that space for 2 years, and then you actively, and then you said, I ended up quitting on principle. Let's put these principles to the test. What do you know? I'm asking you this because many people who are mad and crazy, like we are, about making the world a better place, often have these junctures that they hit, these forks in the road, where their values are put to the test. So, I quit on principle. What do you mean you quit on principle? What was happening that made you decide to become a more principled Steph than you already were?
Look, I'm a very proud idealist. Viktor Frankl has this beautiful black and white talk. Well, there's a beautiful black and white video of Viktor Frankl on YouTube, and the video is called "Idealists Are the Real Realists." And he talks about how when he was being given flying lessons, how you have to do a thing called crabbing, where if you want to end up over here, you have to fly, into the wind north of or ahead of where you want to end up, because the wind's going to push you down. And so his point is that if you want to end up over here, you have to fly into the wind, and you have to aim higher, right? And and then of course you've got the co-founder of the Schumacher College, Satish Kumar, who said people call me an idealist, and I say to them, well, look what the realists have done to the world. So so I'm unabashedly an idealist. And when I say I quit on principle, what happened was two things. One was that, we were installing these, not super giant, but, hundreds of kilowatt solar systems, which were most of that because the solar panel was mostly producing heat through the medium of hot water and some electricity. That's what and our niche was the hospitality industry. And I was installing these, solar systems on big hotels and for hotel groups and so on, and having conversations with, the head of engineering at the Hilton Group and these kinds of things. And that was all fine. We understood our niche and we were going into it. But at the same time, I was doing a little DIY solar project with an NGO called Project 90 by 2030, where we were working with 10 schools around Cape Town with little groups of 10 students from each school. And I designed a little solar kit, which was just a small 40-watt solar panel, a battery, and a little charge controller attached to USB ports, and everybody build this thing for themselves. And then it was this kind of macro connects to micro. So on the day that we were working with the solar panel, I'd say to them, okay, this system, what is energy harvesting? How does that happen on a large scale? And then on the day that we were working with the battery, I'd say, okay, this is the battery. This is your energy storage system. What does energy storage mean? Why don't we have energy storage at a grid level? What is the grid? The grid is like a battery. Yes, no. And the students really got into it. I remember one student at one point asked me, on the one morning, I was so proud when he asked this question. He said, but why is it then that the government wants to build nuclear power plants? And the perceptivity of the question, told me, yeah, you're getting it. That's exactly that. That's the question.
These are high school students
between grade 10 and 12. Yeah. And
right.
Anyway, so
crazy. Okay.
It was really a great question, right? Yeah. And so anyway, so during that program, during the second year of that program, I was on the roof of a kindergarten in Turkey, which is just a bit north of southern suburbs of Cape Town. That's north of me, which is why they call where I live the Deep South. And I was installing this little 40-watt solar panel that was just going to power a couple of lights for this kindergarten. And I suddenly realized that doing that was far more meaningful to me than these, hundreds of kilowatt hour or kilowatt systems that I was doing for the hotel groups, and there was a really big disparity there for me, because previously my kind of ambitious mindset was that the larger the renewable energy system I'm working with, the more impact I'm having. It was this very kind of, and all of a sudden I was like, no, that's not true. It's what the renewable energy is doing that matters to me. And I knew that, but for, and so we, the management team in the Netherlands felt that progress wasn't fast enough with the sales pipeline manager, who would bring different expertise, or he would drive the team harder or do whatever. And from the moment I met this guy, I knew he was completely values misaligned with our organization. And I said to the person who had hired me for the job I was in and who was leading our team, what are we doing, kind of getting to bed with this person to lead our organization? And it was bumping heads, day in, day out, we were bumping heads, me and him in particular, but just, him and the momentum and the ethos of the company in general.
Was it because he was profiteering? I mean, or was he a profit over people kind of a person? What was it? I mean, we don't have to really get into the depths of his personality, but just high level, what was it about him that was like off? I mean, this is a renewable energy enterprise, right? So,
well, I mean, he wasn't coming from, I cannot recall what his background was, but he was coming from a different background. But because of what that was, he had some network and some potential clients in the renewable energy space. I don't know what it was that the head office, that the team in the Netherlands saw in him, to be honest. But what I don't like to draw black and white lines, but thought leaders ahead of me, one being Daniel Quinn, who wrote the book Ishmael, and then My Ishmael and Story of B. These have been formative books for me in my understanding of why we are where we are in the world today. He talks about how there are leavers and takers in the world. There are people who leave everything they can on the table because they realize that collaboration comes first. And then there are takers for whom competition comes first. And he was a taker. Okay. He was someone for whom, it was an extractive mindset. And I have a knack for identifying people's mindsets and paradigms. And I just knew he was extractive in his mindset. And it was, he was sweating the assets, as they say. He was pushing me to see what to do, like how I'd respond. And I knew what he was doing, and I didn't leave because of what he was doing. I left because he thought that was the right way to test me and to, you know what I mean? I said, I see the game you're playing, and I don't want to play it with you. So I'm out.
I hear you. I like that. You chose to leave. You were not pushed out, but you chose to leave because the nature of the game that this new, but where it was coming from was not why you're in the space to begin with. Okay, so I like this. So then you put in your resignation, and then you ended up, now you 2 years into this new transition into really social, environmental enterprise. Okay, so that's where we ended off, right? Okay, then where to from there?
Well, just to line up the timelines here a little bit. So this time with in the renewable energy company, it was 2015 to 2017. And it was during that time that he recently passed away. He was a wonderful human being, and he curated this space to create as much cross-pollination of ideas as possible. A real maven, someone who collected people. He would regularly bring up people up to the 4th floor of the building where we had our office space, and we had one of our solar panels there, and he would tell people, this is Solaris, this is what they do, tell them what you do, and he would do this thing. And during that time,
so rest in peace, man.
Yeah. Thank you. During that time, I came across biomimicry. I'd heard about it before. So biomimicry being this design discipline that looks to nature to solve human challenges.
So and bio I started doing being nature, life, and mimicry being what? I mean, emulation. I don't want to emulation, copying or to
copying.
Right. Yeah, to copy, to emulate. Okay, so you came across biomimicry. Is this as a idea, concept, or you mean you met people in this co-working space running an organization called biomimicry, or are you talking about the idea?
I met people who were participating, who had just finished some workshops, and
which you are now a co-director of.
Of biomimicry essay,
Yes.
subsequent
Okay.
to
Now I'm just
Claire's.
throwing that in there. I'm just throwing that in there.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Which I'm now the co-director of. That happened roughly 5 years after I came across So it's a design discipline, and I came across people in that co-working space who were working with Claire and who had recently done some of her workshops. I'm totally taken by the concept. It made a lot of sense to me intuitively. The examples I had seen of what happens when one does biomimicry as a practice really inspired me, and so I did some workshops. And yeah, and during one of the workshops, I had this aha moment when I really kind of stepped into the shoes of this new paradigm, of this way of seeing the world, where I saw myself and everything we're doing as I'm just an organism in an ecosystem, and we have a role to play, and it's right relationship with the rest of the ecosystem, which is going to give me the tools I need and the perspective I need and the inspiration I need to play my role in making things better, because I don't want to be putting band-aids on the symptoms of our problems. I want to be addressing root causes.
But Steph, I mean, somebody would say, look, systems thinking has been a part of organizational design, so the idea that you are part of a system is not new. I mean, so what do you mean by new paradigm? But I don't mean from where you stand now. I mean, at the time, it was a new paradigm, but I think that's part of system. So how could that be a new paradigm? I want you to take us to that aha moment.
Thank you. That's yes. Okay. So this is an interesting one. I will say explicitly that, from the point of view of paradigm shift of perspective, what biomimicry did for me was that. But explicitly, as it's common taught or delivered as a framework, biomimicry doesn't necessarily provide the level of rigor in terms of systems thinking tools that already predate biomimicry. It was mostly about the perspective and the philosophy, the ethos of biomimicry is what got me. It was the why. When it comes to the actual tools we use to engage with complex systems, you're right. Systems thinking is a field that's already there. I think I will also say that, you say that we all know this, but they've done studies with, your average layman, your average person who's not in this work, and people find it incredibly difficult to connect the dots in complex systems. They've looked at things like, can a person understand the steps between, not something that is innate to everyone. It has to be taught. And biomimicry offers a very intuitive way to get into that. And so what happened for me was, so the first step in biomimicry is I want to create a sustainable way of, we need to talk in terms of verbs, in terms of functions, because if I tried to find a water bottle in nature, I'm not going to. But if you tell me transport water, you want to harvest water, those things I can go look for those functions in nature. Life's been evolving for 3.8 billion years. It's figured out some incredibly sophisticated ways to transport water, to store water, to collect water. And
so this I really like this analogy here. So the product is not a water brand. It's a bottle. It's a water carrier. So somebody says, like, I want to produce something like this that stores water, for an example, right? So just to be clear, so it's not they're not producing.
To get at with that is that's where the reframing of the problem solution space starts to happen with biomimicry. And it was in the process of practicing that I started to see the central argument of biomimicry, which is that, as I said before, life has been evolving for 3.8 billion years. It has solved many of the problems that we're trying to solve. And I can rattle off a long list of really innovative, radically innovative solutions to, I'm going to say specifically, form-based problems that humans have that have come directly from learning from nature.
I want to stick with this analogy here because I think it's something that, our listeners, and even for me, it's really a simple enough analogy to unpack this. So let's break it down. So I come to you, Steph, and I say, I want to create a water bottle. What would the old paradigm want to do to create a water bottle? So let's take it step by step. So this is the conceptualization phase. We're ideating this new idea. We're brainstorming it. I said, look, I want to create a water bottle. What would the old or the non-biomimicry paradigm do in this ideation phase? And let's juxtapose it with the biomimicry paradigm. Let's start with the ideation. Then we'll go into...
It would say, well, where are you trying to position your new low-cost product, then we'll probably try and find the very cheapest type of water container we can. And so it would take this, it would take the approach where trying to create the right market fit at the right price point would be the primary objective. You're trying to solve for X where X is exactly. That's it.
Market share, Porter's 5 forces. The stuff we all get shoved down our throats when you study business. Yes.
Exactly, that's where you'd be at. And instead, if someone comes to me and says, I'll say, well, first of all, the fact that you're speaking to me means that you want to do something radically different, and that making sure that this way of storing and, of course, also then transporting water is sustainable. And we say, well, what does sustainable mean? Of course, nowadays, sustainability has gone out of fashion. I mean, everything nowadays, people are talking about regenerative design. What is regenerative design? Well, regenerative design recognizes that and this is one of the taglines of biomimicry as a field, is life creates conditions conducive to life. Everything in the world, everything living system has found a way to participate in this grand collaboration where everything is creating the conditions conducive to more life. And so we say, okay, well, the fact that you're talking to me means that you want your water bottle to not be extractive, and you don't want it to be taking hydrocarbons that get turned into a plastic bottle that gets thrown away in a linear waste-based economy that ends up on a landfill site. You want to create a water bottle, a way to store and transport water, which is going to somehow participate in, figure out where in nature are there really well-suited strategies, biological strategies and mechanisms for transporting and storing water, or storing and transporting water. And I might go look at the way that cacti are able to, cacti have this incredible form where they shrink when they have the drought, when they have less access to water. And
so cacti being the plural of cactuses.
Yes,
being the plural of cactuses. Yeah,
plural of cactus. Yeah. So the cactus, this fibrous kind of medium inside the cactus can expand to hold more water when more water is available, right? So I can say, well, that's very interesting. How does the cactus do that? And maybe we find a biological mechanism there that we can emulate, and we can design some kind of radically more efficient water bottle from it. But to go back to your question, the starting point is to go, well, we want to make sure that however we create this product that stores and transports water, that it is at the very least not extracting from the natural world and polluting the natural world, not contributing to toxicity at the very least. And of course, what we'd like to be doing ideally is for it to be, in some way or numerous ways, to be giving back to life, to the ecosystem that it came out of.
Okay. So, I see you. That's a great example. So you got captivated by this idea of biomimicry. For me, the first thing that comes to mind with biomimicry is the typical, Animal Planet. I like watching that stuff, Animal Planet, National Geographic stuff. And, I just remember seeing different kinds of puffer fish, right? That can mimic the environment. You started off this discussion speaking about My Octopus Teacher, and I watched that documentary, and the way in which, octopuses can change shape, color, form, and just how they can
mind-blowing
look like whatever is around them, right? Or chameleons, right? So for me, when I hear biomimicry, that's just what I think. I see a little creature that's just transforming itself magically to fit its environment, and with which to try and build a new world that's just. So you meet these people at this co-working space, and you said you met the lady who founded biomimicry.
Yes,
let's pick it up from there.
All right, thanks. So that happens, and devastatingly, I realized that the way we're doing renewable energy is a Band-Aid on a symptom of our larger problems. It's not addressing a root cause. It's not the way we're doing it. And we can, there's a couple of concepts here which are really important. The one is energy blindness, which is that most people just don't at all see the embedded and embodied. That what that means is that people don't recognize that the infrastructure we need to create the energy sources renewable, the infrastructure we need to harvest all of our current, to convert so that all of our current energy demands in the world are met by renewable energy tomorrow. And if in the process of making that transition by tomorrow, we using the new renewable energy capacity as we were transitioning to produce more of the renewable energy infrastructure that we need, we would still blow through the carbon emissions ceiling that we've set to try and avoid 2 degrees warming. So, we have to think a lot harder about this, and think a lot more systemically about this issue, because, energy efficiency is, I would say, radically increasing our energy efficiency is probably 70 to 80% of the game at this stage. And then once we've radically become more efficient, then we can say, right, how do we now, where and how do we source the renewable energy that we need? We've become gluttonous and lazy because of the available of cheap, abundant hydrocarbons and our ability to access them.
By energy efficiency, do you mean the way, okay, because if we're going to speak about energy sources after the fact, then what does energy efficiency then mean? Because from where I'm standing, you would consider efficiency in light of the source. So is it solar? Is it wind? Because the way I see it is that each technology uses a different mechanism. And so the idea of efficiency should be based on the source. But you're coming up with something different. So what do you mean by that? I think break it down.
Right. So I guess if I understand you correctly, what you're talking about is, the way we would compare different energy sources by, say, comparing their LCOE, their levelized cost of energy, to say...
Talking about the mechanism of harvest, conversion, generation into usable, accessible energy. So,
yes,
a solar panel has its way of working. And so what is efficient for a solar panel, when we talk about efficiency, it's an abstract concept. So when you say efficiency is 70 to 80% of the game, I just...
Fantastic body of work by an organization called the Rocky Mountain. So in industrial processes, there's many, many places in many industrial processes where we are moving liquids or gases through pipes, right? And friends just arriving home on a motorbike, and it's going to make a noise. All right. So there are many places where we are transporting liquids and gases through pipes. And because it's been cheaper to produce piping systems that have 90-degree elbows, sharp corners, those pumping systems are very inefficient. So we have to install large pumps to push these liquids and fluids through those pumps. And
because they have to take sharp turns. So you need a lot of whatever the substance through. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And because energy has historically been cheap, it made more sense to create physically compact piping systems with 90-degree corners and just install a larger pump and therefore liquid or gas through a 90-degree corner. But if you take that same 90-degree corner that you need to make and you make it a radius, a pipe that has a smooth radius, a consistent bend, it becomes much more efficient. The liquid flows through it much more efficiently, because if you imagine a 90-degree corner, it's the liquid almost it hits the end of the pipe, yes, and then it has to turn 90 degrees, and it's not very efficient. When you ride a bicycle, you don't, every time you want to turn, you don't suddenly stop and on a dime and it's like you hit a wall and then all of a sudden change direction. No, you bend in a curve, and the liquid wants to do the same. So they did the math and they looked at, what if at the industrial scale of the entire economy of the US, what if we converted all of our piping to radiuses? And it is absolutely incredible, the reduction in overall energy consumption. It's the power of multiple small gains, and it adds up to a really profound amount of energy that you save. So now your overall energy consumption of that entire industrial system is way lower, which means that you need less energy to make it work.
Okay, so this is okay. So this is and that's a great example again of biomimicry, because in nature you don't, even with the rivers, and you know what I mean, and
there's no 90 degrees.
Yeah, there is no 90 degrees. However, in terms of the industrial complex, what would it then? where does the incentive? Okay, so energy is cheap, so we can have bigger pumps. So what then makes 90 degrees piping attractive?
So form.
Good, I hear you. Okay,
Yeah.
I hear you. Okay,
And
so
it's just it's because a bend takes up more space.
all right. So now that makes sense. So you would rather increase the cost of, not even increase the cost, you'd rather increase the energy to pump, especially if it's cheap, rather than create more space, etc. So in the case of the United States, given what you're saying, how do you go about refurbishing things if you need more space for this curvature or this, this bend to mimic biology in this bending fashion? Where are you going to find the space?
The space is there, right? I mean, there's very few cases where ultimately the piping system is so tight that you can't fit on just retrofit and fit a bend in where you had a 90 degree. In most cases, you can. You cut away a little bit of the pipe on both sides and you put in your bend rather where your 90 degree elbow used to be. I think I don't know if the depth of their research went in so far as looking, in what subset of the industrial complex are the piping systems overall too dense to allow for this, but it would be a tiny percentage.
Okay, so this is a really great example. So I want to come back to your narrative here. So
yes, let's do it.
I think you've really outlined what this idea is. So you meet Claire, she inspires you, and then what happens? She's running this organization called Biomimicry, which is all about what we've just
South
discussed.
Africa. Yeah.
So yes, pick it up from there.
Yeah. So then I. Around that time, maybe 6 months later, I did the quit on principle thing, and I had a little bit of money saved up, and I thought to myself, listen, like I thought renewable, this was some kind of turning point, and because I'd now done renewable energy for 2 years and realized suddenly, okay, it wasn't. This isn't the climax of my thesis of what I want to do. The journey was always just to get into renewable energy to empower other things. But now I'm seeing that that's not the root cause. Of course, during this time, I'd also seen how, energy is directly correlated to it. There's a 1-to-1 relationship between economic growth and energy consumption. So I was very much aware that energy as our systemic issues. But I wanted to go and find out what are other people doing. So I did the quit in principle thing, and I went traveling. I went to go live in Namibia for 3 months. I was dating an American woman who was based in a remote town in Namibia, and I went to go live with her for 3 months. She was doing women's empowerment and girls' education work there as a Peace Corps volunteer, and I wanted to know what that was about. So I went to go see what that was about. And then I went traveling to Southeast Asia, and just a lot of it was a lot of deep research, doing what I would call a self-directed master's. I was reading prolifically, mostly systems thinking books, trying to inculcate this different way of thinking in myself, and then also meeting practitioners. Who are the people who are trying to do things differently? And I came back to South Africa a while later with the idea that regenerative agriculture is there's no silver bullet. There are different things that we have to do to address these converging crises of our time. But I decided that regenerative agriculture was, for me, the biggest concern, because we have these incredibly fragile industrialized food systems, and with climate change already underway, climate shocks are going to have large impacts on our food system, which is so fragile. And if we create a more resilient food system, then not only do we empower people to produce their own food, but to regenerate soils and produce healthy food. If you're doing farming the right way, you also happen to be restoring water cycles, and you're also cleaning the air by having just creating more plant life. And so I came back to South Africa and tried to start a business.
Were you still dating this Peace Corps lady at the time?
No, I wasn't.
You are really a jet through and through. Even the people you date are, social. You curate everything in your life according to these values. Anyway, this is not about her. This is about
it's self-selection bias. It's self-selection bias.
I like it. You're the real deal. So you came back to South Africa, yes?
Yeah, and I was living like a traveler in my own country. I got invited to go live I was trying to start a business in regen and chat, and I'd show up and just have conversations. And I had no aim in mind. I just wanted to meet them and hear what their stories were. And for me, absolutely incredible depth of connection that we can form when one just shows up to listen to people. And in fact, the connection between you and I before we met today was Brenda Martin, who was one of the people I met during that time. And we really connected and understood each other. And so there were many connections like that I made. And it was my first attempt at trying to start a business. I was doing freelance consulting work at the same time to give myself runway. Then at some point I was offered an opportunity to go live on a farm and work on a alternative education program for young 20-somethings who have a bit of experience under their belt.
An opportunity to live on a farm, living off the land and living sustainably while being part of a program that educates young 20-somethings. No, this is not. What kind of a farm is this? Let's start there.
Actually, it was previously operating as a retreat center, a really well respected retreat center around health and wellness. But at that stage, they wanted to transition away from hosting those kinds of retreats and events. And they had been growing food to supply as part of the hospitality service of the retreat center. And the people who owned and so they invited a small team to be what they called the development team of this. The idea was we would spend the first 9 months co-developing the curriculum and the next 9 months developing it to the first cohort. And we would live there and we would grow food. And I arrived there actually the day before South Africa announced lockdown in 2020.
So this is the COVID era. Okay, yeah, sure.
My first 3 months of COVID lockdown was spent on a 240-hectare farm with 10 or so other people, and it was as if the rest of the world just didn't exist. It
was on your side, man.
Absolutely.
So privileged. Other people were stuck in apartments in other countries. They couldn't go home, But you were, you were doing what you love, and on this farm, continue, sure.
So we're going to accelerate the story here slightly and saying the what was meant to be an 18-month project imploded after 3 months. That's a whole other story. And when that happened, I had basically no resources to my name because I had halted my freelance consulting work so that I would arrive there with no work to have to do while there, so I could fully commit. So I burned through the last of my savings in the period getting up to being there. And
how old are you at this stage, Steph?
Well, this was 2020, so I was 30. Yeah, and of course that's for someone 30 years old it was a difficult situation to see myself in, living the values that I hold so dearly rather than just talking about them and trying to tell other people how to do them.
So this is where many people like you and I, we can call this the dark night of the soul or whatever. But this is those junctures in one's life where you kind of say, is this save the world stuff worth it? I'm 30 years old, and if I had stuck to my engineering career, I would have a big house and a really great car and awesome pension fund and probably some shares in the company that I'm working with and amazing holidays in the Bahamas and et cetera, et cetera. But here I am trying to teach kids, work on farm. And how was that? Because one of the big things we want to accomplish with this podcast with Jet is that we see a lot of amazing people, young people. And, that would mean that you're 35 now. And by global standard definitions, 35, you're at the edge of your youth, but you are still a young person. And at least as far as the African Union is concerned, 35 and below is young. So we see a lot of young, talented people giving up on these endeavors simply because of the ego burnout a lot. You often have to invest your own resources, time, money, social network. And so here you are at 30, and this is an archetype of what many of our listeners and many of us, and even something personally that I've been through. And you're sitting, man, I could have had a much easier and better life. So what was your headspace at this time? Because your savings are gone. This utopian idea of living on a farm and has blown up. And take us to that headspace? What was going on in Steph's 30-year-old brain at the time?
I really appreciate you highlighting this, not because I get to tell my story about it, but just because you're right. It is an archetype. It is a pattern that's playing out. I want to say a few things about it just as caveats. The one is that, in context, with historically entrenched wealth means that my socioeconomic position is such that I have a safety net. That even though there were phases where I rejected that safety net and said, I'm not going to rely on family, I'm going to pretend there is no safety net because I wanted to prove to myself that I could make it on my own. The fact of the matter is that deep down, I know that I have that. If in late 2019, just before I moved to this farm, I had a falling out with my family, and I'd been staying in my family apartment where I didn't have to pay rent, so that I could try to be an entrepreneur in the regenerative agriculture space. And when I had that falling out with my family, decided that I didn't want the fact that I'm living for free in our apartment lorded over me. I didn't end up on the street. I ended up in my friend's family's holiday home. There are a lot of people for whom things like that just aren't options. And so I just want to say that I recognize an incredible degree of privilege just in the fact that I get to try and go on. So, that's definitely always been in the back of my mind. Where my headspace was at it was a utopian experience living on this farm, except for the social dynamics, which you so perceptively highlighted there. I was, to bring in another element of the story, it was the previous partner who'd taken me to Southeast Asia, and it was a Irish partner that I brought back to South Africa from Southeast Asia, and she was with me on the farm, and let's go to Europe, let's go to Ireland and have a soft landing with my family there. And it was just a immediate full body yes for me. I had been, I have Italian heritage, I have an Italian passport, which again makes it very easy to go to Europe. Sold my car, spent half of the money buying very expensive plane tickets because there were 2 flights a week leaving South Africa on Emirates. And, with the leftover money, I had a tiny little amount of money. When you go to Europe, turn it into euros, it's next to nothing. It was mid-COVID. At this point, I said to myself, look, I'm going to put my ideals on hold. I am going to get my financial feet back under me. I'm going, if I have to, I'll bog standard corporate engineering world and just get a job and just do that. That's what I said to myself I was going to do. And I set out to do that. But of course, it's mid-COVID and there are hiring freezes.
But you're staying at this Irish lady's family's place.
Yes.
You're one of those, aren't you? You quite the player. What I like is that you play in the value space. So so there was a hiring freeze, but you're in Ireland right now, and you've decided, you know what? For now, I'm not giving up on it forever, but for now, let's put a pause on this do-gooder stuff, and let me get practical about at least being beyond survival in this modern economy, right? Sure. Right.
And what happened then was I needed to get out of the house that I was living in with my partner and her family because it was driving all of us crazy. It was a big shock in many ways to go from this 240 hectare farm to a small home in the southern suburbs of Dublin. And my partner's mother she's a wonderful human being. The option was to go live as a volunteer. So there's this fantastic website called Workaway, where people are looking for people to help them with farming projects, with whatever. It's just people who have some kind of project they're working on and they want extra hands. And the model is you go and live with them by virtue of it being mediated by this platform. The default agreement is that you give them 25 hours of your time a week in exchange for board and lodging, and you help them with whatever they need your help with. And it was a fantastic solution for me because...
Does this include food?
Yes,
or do you have...
exactly.
Okay.
So they feed you, they give you a place to stay, and you spend a maximum of 25 hours a week helping them out with whatever. And I ended up for 9 months living with a family who were on a piece of land that's roughly 8 hectares. 2/3 of it is a woodland, and the head of the household was busy rebuilding a house for the family using timber from the woodland on their land. And thanks to a past business In Ireland, yeah. In rural Ireland, yeah, about 2 hours south of Dublin. I ended up living there, and I spent 3 days a week helping to build this house. And 2 days a week, I've been doing my outreach thing again. I wanted to get back into met a group of people based in the UK who were working on a startup. They had a more advanced and more sophisticated version of what I had been trying to do in South Africa. And I said to them, hey, like, I know what it takes to try and get this kind of thing off the ground. Your ideas are more sophisticated and more and further down the road than mine were. Can I just join you at risk pro bono and help out however I can, so that when this thing gets off the ground, then I join you as a team member? And they said, cool. And so I was doing that 2 days a week online, and 3 days a week I was working with my hands, and that turned out to be a great model for me. That split of kind of 60-40 with tactile physical work, because the work behind a computer, creating and of doing, was very beneficial. And of course, I'm an engineer by training, and I grew up watching my father, work in his workshop. So that kind of physical work is important to me. And I did that for 9 months.
So it was
and
something
then
you could ease into. So you weren't suffering from calluses and splinters in your hands. I mean, of course you had minor injuries, but what I'm saying is that it was something you could do. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, I've got to do this construction.
No, not at all. Not at all. I reveled in it. I loved it. I really just made the most of all of it, and got to play with a lot of interesting hardware toys too, like little, caterpillars and diggers, and lots of working with chainsaws and jackhammers and you name it. No, I really loved it, and it kept me sane. It absolutely kept me sane. So doing that. And then 9 months later, the startup hadn't gone off the ground, and I said to them, guys, I need to go and get a job. COVID lockdowns had lifted by this point. COVID restrictions had lifted. And I joined an online course because I thought I need a community of practice around this particular topic, which I care about a lot, which is the idea of sense making. This idea of, we're being flooded with information. There's a lot more noise than there is signal. How do we make sense of what's really going on? And it turns out that there's an online community who explore this topic together. And I joined them for a 6-week program. And in the first session, a guy on the Zoom chat introduced himself as being from Dublin. I immediately found him on LinkedIn, messaged him. We met up the next week. First 10 minutes of the conversation, he's like, so we have a position that we need and just explore their values alignment. And it was perfect alignment. This is an organization in Dublin called Native Events. Shout out to them. And they're a bunch of crazies trying to bring sustainability to the event sector in Ireland. I joined them as which later became the transition and energy projects manager, to kind of capture this idea of the projects which we didn't have a box for. Got put on. I lived remotely. Well, I worked remotely mostly. I was living in the far southwest of Ireland on a little piece of land, again in a little community, again growing food. That whole story. And and it was during that time that I was invited to join as co-director of Biomimicry South Africa. And this brings us full circle.
Yeah, it does. Is it because you were in touch with them throughout this period, or did they just think of you, remember you, and reach out, or the invitation? Was it just random for you, or did it come from? Did you continuously update them? Hey, I'm doing this now. I'm doing that now, and then eventually they said, yeah.
So Claire and I would regularly have conversations. When I was in Southeast Asia, I'd give her a call when some kind of opportunity came up, and she would encourage me to pursue it. And then it didn't quite work out. But then again in 2021, when I felt like things were stable in my life, I reached out again and I said, hey, 2020, I said, hey, things are quite stable in my life now. I'd like to continue my learning journey, and with you as my mentor. And she said, great, but there's a financial exchange there. And I said, but I don't have the money for that right now, but can I do a work exchange with you instead? And so I got involved in setting up a very interesting 2022.
May your soul rest in peace.
She was a force of nature, and it was a big shock to friends and family and the community, because she touched many people's lives. And so I'd been in touch with her throughout, but interestingly, I had never spoken to Jane, who had been working with Claire on the business side of things before her passing. And Jane and I then, through a completely random connection with the woman Saskia, who runs Biomimicry Netherlands, she put us in touch, Jane and I in touch. At first I was like, who's this interloper who's haven't even heard of her? And we get on our first call, and immediately, it's just, we resonated very strongly on this idea of biomimicry being about more than just creating innovation inspired by nature, about this deeper work of paradigm shift. So I brought a lot of network and a lot of kind of a longer history with the organization. And I carried on living in Ireland for another 2 years, and then I came home back to Cape Town in October 2023.
Okay, so you were working with biomimicry remotely at the time. Biomimicry South Africa remotely.
Yes.
I mean, it just seems like the gods of synchronicity are always with you, man. They're just always with you. So, you meet Jane, I believe. Jane, right? It's Jane. And, you figure out that, geez, you're practically neighbors in terms of community of practice. And you mentioned Biomimicry Netherlands. Now, so is Biomimicry Netherlands, South Africa, what is this now? Are they independent? Is this a global network? What really?
It's a global network.
Okay.
So the work was started by Biomimicry 3.8 and the Biomimicry Institute in the US. They were operating under different names in the early days. But in the early days, the early 2000s, they were inviting change makers from around the world to participate in a learning journey to get trained as biomimicry practitioners or biomimicry professionals and biomimicry specialists. So those are three different titles for three different kind of milestones in your learning journey with the practice. And Claire was one of the people in the second cohort that they'd ever hosted. The idea was you come to America, you get this in-depth 2-year training, you go back to South Africa and you catalyze a network in your region. There's a biomimicry network in Taiwan, in Australia, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Denmark, in Sweden, in Norway, in Italy. In France, there's what I would say the most successful biomimicry, that's what I would say is an organization called CBIAS in France. Also, shout out to them. Also, because they write industry reports. And although they're French, the one industry report that they have that is in English is the one on energy. And what that report does is, so it's a global network at this stage. Some networks are more successful than others. South Africa, under Claire's leadership, was one of the most successful in actually the number of people trained in the practice, but also in the number of real world projects that were.
Because what I understood when we started our discussion was that you are a co-director of Biomimicry South Africa, and I saw it as a social enterprise that you and Jane are running. But from what I'm hearing, if I want to, I can start another chapter. I'm not really. How does the entity work? Is it a business? Is it a franchise? Is it just an NGO? Where does membership lie? Just briefly, not too, but just briefly,
cool.
So that our
so
listeners
Claire's
understand.
Organization until that very last project, she believed that if you do that, then you create an atmosphere of exclusivity around the practice. So Claire's approach was Biomimicry South Africa is not a company; it's a self-organizing network. If you identify with the practice and with the values, you're now a part of it. And she would. And if you really expressed a lot of interest in being more intimately involved, some odd opportunity would come along her way, and she had a knack and a track record of throwing people in the deep end with opportunities, and she had a way of seeing the potential in people, and that's one of the things that made her such a fantastic leader for the movement. But generally speaking, in the world, if you resonate with it, and there's not, you can either find the chapter in your area and you can support their efforts. Or you can just start your own. If you're in a region where there isn't a network yet, you can just start your own. And
so, Biomimicry South Africa, you are now an organization.
We incorporated because for the project with the UNDP in 2020, they needed to be a registered organization. Claire always just partnered with other organizations to run the finances and so on through them. But for this project, we were the implementation partner, so we actually had to incorporate. So we're a PTY Limited and operating as a social enterprise.
What was this project with the United Nations Development Program, UNDP?
It was also in partnership with the CSIR, which is I can never remember the name of the acronym. It's the Council of Scientific
Research, yeah.
Something like that, research. And the project was a partnership between the UNDP and CSIR and Biomimicry SA. CSIR had previously installed communities in South Africa, and this project was to uncover or design socioeconomic opportunities, like opportunities for SMEs and other micro enterprises that would leverage this low-cost, high-speed internet by the community for the community. So it was so we facilitated the participatory design process with the communities, and then the biomimicry design lens was the framework for how we would design those solutions and evaluate them with the community to make sure that they were sustainable solutions also.
Give me an example of how this will. I mean, the moment you have the United Nations involved and the CSIR, we are talking institutional level. So give us an example of how biomimicry applied in this project so we can now get a sense of how you guys actually practice it.
It's at that level it's fairly rudimentary, because nature is so sophisticated that if you want to get into the really high technology practices, you need a lab. A lot of the really super exciting innovative stuff comes out of university led labs or research labs that are privately funded. But at this level it's quite grassroots, but nonetheless so that for most people, they don't sound so sexy, but they're nonetheless the cornerstones of how we create a more sustainable human world, right? And so things like you go to a community and you ask them, what are your challenges? What do you struggle with? And it's all the typical things. It's waste, just accumulation and proliferation of waste. It's not insufficient energy. It's lack of access to clean water. It's food insecurity, and so you would ask the community to identify their problems and then really look at why do those problems exist, and trying to just keep asking why and keep going into it and bringing in as many voices as possible. And often, the problem is the solution. And so in the process of asking questions, you arrive at the point where there's often a turning point, and you realize, okay, this part of the problem, the heart of it, is where the solution lies. And then we say, right, well, waste is quite an easy one from a biomimicry perspective, right? Because in nature, there is no such thing as waste. Every output becomes an input for something else. And so the question there is, well, what are your waste streams, and what can they become an input for? And what kind of socioeconomic opportunity can we create that takes that input and turns it into something of value for someone else or for another process? So where the typical industrial approach is to try to simplify everything, in nature you try to add layers of complexity and to bring new processes in to create a circular economy.
Yeah. I can hear undertones of the circular economy, and I know you've had a conversation with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation as well, and the lady herself, so to speak. So, okay, great. So you incorporated, as a result of this project, Biomimicry South Africa is now social enterprise, a private enterprise that you are a co-director of, and here we stand with you as co-directing it, at this age, and I guess every sacrifice sort of pays off. And what are you guys focusing on right now? And I'm sure you're doing a lot of things, but what are the interesting things you're focusing on right now? Perhaps what are the challenges? Many young people like yourself, having to build organizations in this values and paradigm, it's not easy. You mentioned, burnout. That's something that's very common again, burnout and attracting the right people. What is it like? Perhaps let's start there. Let's start with the organizational development before we actually go into the content. How has that been? A young person, co-director, how big is biomimicry? And what is it like to manage something like this and, not burn out and attract the right talent?
So we are currently a relatively small, and we're a lean team, and people kind of move in and out quite fluidly depending on the needs of the moment. Jane and I hold the center. We regularly have, all right, we hold the center. Then there's a friend of ours, Milan, who we consider to be core part of the team, but he's currently on sabbatical. He's doing a scholarship, a Fulbright scholarship in the US, his second master's in sustainability. And then we have Gamakikta Sabanda, who I've mentioned before. He's based in Johannesburg. He's a biomimicry professional, and he's been with the organization since Claire's day. And he'll have his own story about how Claire threw him in the deep end with biomimicry. He has a full-time job. So, he's there, he supports us, he's part of the organization. And on a project-to-project basis, he'll step in as and when we need him. I would consider him kind of one of the elders of the organization. We have Michelle, who's based in the UK. She helps us with administration. She helps us with graphic design, with maintaining the website. And she's an absolute star. She gets things done faster than I can make requests, and often ends up waiting for us. And she's really good at just getting things done. And she's supporting us. She's involved at risk pro bono because she believes in the cause. Then we have Carla and Ariana. These are two further colleagues who are both project leads on different projects that we're trying to spin up. And again, either small, just, small ad hoc payments to them, or they're contributing at risk pro bono because they're at a phase in their life where they realize that they want their work to be meaningful and part of the solution, not the problem. And they found us, and they resonate with the values, and so they want to try and be a part of this, and so they're willing to take a risk to help us get projects off the ground so that there are roles for them in those projects and in the organization.
Okay, so what that's very interesting model there, and I think all of us can learn something from that, and I think that's the model of the and growth is the object. And, creating value in an organization like this so that all these people that are participating can work full time, etc., is the aim. How are you trying to accomplish this right now? What are your projects? What are your aims? What are you focused on right now?
So we've kept what we call our 3 pillars, which are the ones that Claire formulated: the connecting work, the educating work, and the activating work. So the connecting will be our advocacy and our networking. It'll be like when I was working with Claire before in 2016, 2017, I was running the Cape Town Biomimicry social network with a friend, where we would host monthly events to tell people about biomimicry and to show examples of it from practitioners around South Africa. So that's advocacy, or maybe it's doing a TED talk, or maybe it's going to a corporate and giving them a talk about the promise of biomimicry in their field. The educating work, Claire used to do the biomimicry workshops. Claire spun off a separate entity, which is called Learn Biomimicry. They have foundational online courses, which Claire developed. So the kind of base of the education part is now held by that, and you can do that online. I think there's still a space for in-person workshops to augment and supplement that, but we're not actively doing those at the moment. I would say the education piece for us is currently in the way that we're working with our interns and our kind of, let's call them apprentices. That's where the education piece is playing out at the moment. And then the activating is where we're trying to create projects. So those are what we call our 3 pillars. I look at those horizontally then, and I say, well, there's two threads for us. These are our kind of philosophical framings of what we're doing. The one is the provocation, or the question, how do we grow people? And the question here for us is, well, what we know is the modern education system has only been around for just over 100 years, and it's highly problematic. The way we separate young people from the goings on of society, we teach them canonical knowledge that is outdated by the time they learn it, and then we ask them to re-enter the working world and to become productive members of society.
Which they can't really change, and because they go into this working world and then they realize they were sold a dream, and they realize They are managed by idiots and assholes who couldn't care about what they've actually learned. And I get
Exactly.
you. They get disillusioned, and that's education, right?
Right. And so we're saying, well, what would it look like if we did away with the thing we call the education system? What if we reintegrated becoming a product? Shows it's very clear what humans need to live long, healthy, happy lives. The biggest determinant of that is having healthy, persistent familial and relationships and friendships. So, if all we really need to live long and healthy lives, the biggest determinant is the state of our relationships. Why are we buying new iPhones every second year and building cruise ships, which are costing the earth, And so we're saying, the way we're creating people, the way we're growing people is not adaptive to the world that we're in. People don't get to spend time in nature where they get to engage with complex systems and understand the very functioning of the ecosystems we all depend upon. How do we expect the next generation to participate in regenerating and protecting and restoring the ecosystems we all depend on if they don't have the most basic ecological literacy of what that entails? So the question, how do we literally, re-nature? How do we rewild? How do we make education? How do we do education differently? And so we have a project. We have a kind of top-down and a bottom-up project in that space. The bottom-up is literally trying to look at working with an existing school, which is already pushing the limits of nature-based education, trying to say, how would we do education differently if we were just completely demolished the existing system? And then our top-down approach is a project where we are interventions for the public school system in South Africa. So that's one of our projects those are 2 of our projects in the how do we grow people thread. Then we have what I call the adjacent possible thread, which is, if we're going to change people's minds about how we build the world, we're going to better give them somewhere to go to actually actively participate in it. So, what do we need? We need nutritious food growing on regenerating soils. We need dignified livelihoods. That means something to do and a home to live in, and we need healthy relationships. And we need some energy. The subset of things we need is very simple. My provocation to humanity is like, can we just get those basics right for all 8 billion humans and allow the more than human world to also survive and thrive? Can we just manage that? And it's a very humble challenge, actually, but we're failing at it as a species. So this adjacent possible thread is us saying, well, let's demonstrate what a regenerative agriculture system looks like. Let's demonstrate what renewable energy could be. Let's demonstrate what a better way of creating homes looks like, homes that aren't full of so energy heavy and intense and are built from renewable materials. And so we're trying to spin up these little projects in all these different spaces to show
Like
what this
piloting.
adjacent possible. Piloting, yeah.
Yeah, I think that is so important, because with the world of today, where by just repurposing things that are there using AI and so forth, I do feel like tangible demonstrations. And this is why having people like you on the podcast is so important, because there's no form of AI aggregated information that can get across what it means to live a life dedicated to the just energy transition. Like, think that what biomimicry is doing is really covering all the elements of what we need for a just energy transition, or a just transition at large. I want to quickly look at this point that you raised about your provocation to humanity, about getting these basics, a clean energy, nutritious food, clean water, healthy spaces to live in, that are just the basics, dignity. For me, this is the anchor of JET, because does your provocation consider this inequality, or, let me not even phrase it that way, but how does your provocation consider these most vulnerable communities in the global South?
It's a very, very good question. The feedback I get most often is one that's firmly rooted in this neoliberal paradigm of ultimate individual freedom and how we should all be able to make of what our lives whatever we want of them, and also assumes that I'm not even going to call it Western, but the North Atlantic paradigm of what development looks like is the thing that everybody, of course, de facto wants to go towards. An easy place for me I'll say two things. It looks like, when I said at the very beginning that, okay, we need renewable energy, the developed, quote unquote developed world, had to go through this phase of having very infrastructure heavy centralized energy systems. And I said at the beginning, well, we get to leapfrog that. We can just go straight to renewable energy. They have to transform their systems, or take
embedded infrastructure they have.
Exactly.
If I'm hearing you.
Whereas a lot of context, where a lot of places in African context don't need to do that. Our challenge in that regard is to build local production capacity, so that we're not relying on having to have the financial resources to pay the other places for those things like solar panels. Then in race to the bottom for food insecurity. But small-scale farming is what feeds most of the world, regions like Africa, and small-scale farming is where it's at, because doing regenerative agriculture, there's a distinction between scaling up and scaling out. And scaling up is you take the one solution and you try to, you increase the size of your productive field, 10x, and you've got one thing growing on that field. Scaling out is about finding the most efficient unit of production, scale of production, which requires people to engage in the food system, and then replicating that many times over. And that's much easier. The big challenge in the African context there is that you have large seed companies, large input-based farming companies coming in and creating dependency in the food system. How is it justifiable to sell seeds to people that don't reproduce, that you grow the plant and then the next year you have to buy the seeds again? It's just, and this is what's happening,
Then you retain the intellectual property to those seeds, you know what I mean? And if you don't
ludicrous.
Buy it, it's yeah, I know.
So my answer ultimately is our what we need to do is leapfrog, is take advantage of what has been continuing to lean into this dependency that we have. It's, why when South Africa introduced the renewable energy independent power producer procurement program, did they not also create a fund where a certain percentage of the income from every one of those projects had to go into a fund that, like a venture capital fund, that would set up a local solar panel production facility? If they'd done that in 2014, by now we could have had a funded facility where we could have been training local tradesmen to go ahead with these things.
And this is why this podcast exists, to amplify a voice. So I think, as we draw this very fascinating conversation to a close, I think there are two things that I want us to round up on, which is the first would be, how can our community interact with Biomimicry South Africa? What are the opportunities for engagement, synergies, and so forth? And, what are things you're looking for, or opportunities you're looking for, or partnerships? That would be the first. The last one would just be your final thoughts to our community. But let's get to the details of that after you tell us. So what is, Biomimicry SA? Who are you trying to work with? For people who are listening, what are your needs? What are potential win-win synergies that you would like with individuals, institutions, or particular regions? Talk to us about that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. So, the easiest way is to go to our website and to fill out our web form or send us an email. People can reach out to me personally on LinkedIn, and I really enjoy that, those personal connections.
We'll also put
thank you. Yeah, and then around what we're working on. You and I originally connected because our mutual friend Brenda had been working on a particular project, Next Economy Enterprise Network, which was a concept to support social entrepreneurs by connecting them to other people like them so they can exchange notes, feel supported, offer support. And we've folded that concept into a program that we're working on, where the title is a work in progress, but we're calling it something like Change Makers by Nature. It's this idea of we support change makers, social entrepreneurs, on their journey of learning the skills and finding the tools they need to practically make a difference, to practically changing the way they do business, to think differently about the problems they're trying to engage with, to think about them more deeply, to engage with a network of other people who want to explore those ideas too. And this is one of the things that once we get through this process of structuring and formalizing our business model, because a lot of the time, to hire a consultant in biomimicry and get them to help you engage with the problem there's a very high barrier to entry in that regard. So we're trying to, as an active, it's mostly in the not-for-profit space, but that's also the space where people are most commonly under-resourced. So can we support those to make a difference with the tools and the knowledge and the perspective that we bring? So I think those are probably the low-hanging fruit.
Okay, so anybody out there that wants to connect with Steph and Biomimicry, please go ahead and do so. And in terms of the pilot projects you mentioned, so if I have a stale piece of land, or, what are the kind of contributions that or partnerships you're looking for in, these pilot projects that you want to use, which I think are important as examples of alternative ways of being?
So our pilot project in the regenerative agriculture space is really about we don't want to be prescriptive in what kind of regenerative agriculture practices one looks at, because that's highly context specific. In some areas, it might be silvopasturing. In other places, it might be just a market garden. In other places, it might be holistic planned grazing. In other places, it might be a food forest. But what we want to look at is what might be the economic and social innovation such that we can create a self-perpetuating system for someone who wants to be food secure, can either, if they're an existing small scale farmer or they want to become one, we're trying to find a model for how there's just an easy recipe of how to go from nothing to having a regenerative market garden, for example, which I know you can make a healthy living from, and then in the process of helping one person set that up, we start to put a small percentage of multiple farmers' incomes back into a fund, which then funds the setup of the next pilot plot like this. So, and if anybody wants to help us think through how we roll that out, or wants to help us, because of course at the beginning it's going to need seed funding to get that off the ground, but we're fairly confident in the model, and so we're just looking for a place to roll that out.
Okay. Yeah, something just came up before the last, before we get your last thoughts there. How do you, so you're doing an MBA right now, right? You're doing an MBA, and I know you're a prolific reader. You're involved in so many things. How do you manage your life, your time now so that you don't burn out? How do you make all these values-based contributions sustainable? What are your insights on that? Many young people are burning out. So what does Steph do, or what would Steph say, to the community?
Thank you. I think a long time ago I came to the conclusion that there's always going to be more to do and there's always going to be more that I want to do than I can possibly do. So that's taken for granted. That's taken as a starting point, and I say, okay, well, I'm never going to be able to do everything, so just do what I can. I also I try my best not to make short-term sacrifices for the long-term. So, for example, I'm very strict on maintaining a healthy sleep rhythm, and on making time for friends. Even though I could be spending every day doing 14-hour days, I know that I can't sustain that. So I make sure that I'm getting my 8 to 9 hours of sleep, and I make sure that I get up and I go for a swim in the ocean, and I spend time with friends and in nature. Nature's a huge one for me. It's just so rejuvenating and re-energizing to just go for a walk, or just go sit in a natural space. It's part of how our nervous systems have evolved to regulate. And so I find that regulation through that. Of course, there's no shortage of scientific evidence around the benefits of mindfulness practices like meditations. So I do that. And yeah, generally I just try to, the main thing is I set a really healthy rhythm. I've looked at the science on how many hours of truly productive work the average person gets done in a day, and I don't expect more than that of myself.
What are those hours? I'm curious. What are they?
6 to 6.5 of actual like focused. I'm on the work time. Then of course you can say that there's the diffuse versus the focused mode of paying attention to something. I would also consider that when I then go for a walk or I go for a swim, whatever. My mind's still active. I'm still technically working, but the time spent focusing, looking at the problem, is about 6 to 6.5 hours a day.
Got you. Why did you choose, you well-traveled, and, as your surname implies, you've got Italian roots. Why did you choose to be in the global South? Why did you choose South Africa? You went to Europe, you went to Southeast Asia, you experienced different cultures, and you met different potential partners that you could have, married or partnered with long-term and stayed there. Why did you choose to come back to South Africa and be here in the global South, in a country that has the highest level of inequality in the world, in a country that has the highest statistics in terms of violence and violent crimes against women and children in the world, et cetera, et cetera? Why did you come back to South Africa and the global South to work on what you're doing?
The simple and most straightforward answer is because it's home. It's the place I care about. It's where my roots are, and I want to honor them, and I want to give of myself to this place. I want to be of service to this place. The other side of that coin is that the rat race, the gauntlet that's created for a human to have to exist in Europe and Northern Europe is a lot more intense, and I just didn't enjoy the intensity of that feeling of having to feel like one's running just to stand still when it comes to income, and of course there's a small minority of people who are beyond that point, but for most people that's what it is. And then also there's because I prioritize being connected to my natural surroundings. Most of Europe is highly domesticated. There are no wild, just, unadulterated spaces of nature left, really. And I felt that I always felt that on a very instinctual level, and it destabilized something inside of me. Even when I was living on the southwest coast of Ireland, pretty much a rural community. It's literally in a part of Ireland called the Wild Atlantic Way. And sure, the seas are wild and the cliff edges are wild, but right up to the cliff edge of that cliff, there's a pasture for sheep or cattle. It's just the whole landscape is dominated by humans and humans' needs and desires and intentions. And I found that very hard to be with. Here right behind my house, there's a mountainside, and every other day I have wild baboons in my garden, and I see hedgehogs at night and mongooses. And we have to engage with the more than human world here. And for me, that keeps me in touch with reality, because the reality is that we don't live in a world made for humans. We live in a more than human world, and we're not the center of everything.
So to close off, what would you say to any person that's listening to this, that's on the verge of giving up, where you were 5 years ago, that's just tired of being, taken for a ride, or having their good intentions abused, or not well rewarded financially for the value that they're actually giving. All of these, being burnt out over and over again, all of these challenges that people in this space of social, economic, energy justice face. What would you say to them? I mean, this person, they've had enough. They can't take it anymore. Their family and friends are laughing at them, saying, "We told you so. We told you to take that lucrative job. Look at you now." What would you say to them, Steph?
I'd say, call me. Let's have a chat.
Dude, I am not going to ruin. That is it. Guys, are you listening? Call Steph. That is one of the best answers. I'm not even going to ruin it. Let's keep that. And last mission statement would be something like from you. Hi, I'm Steph Semprini, and I am a crazy jet because. Then we'll end the recording.
Hello, world. I'm Stefano Semprini. I am a crazy jet because I think that creating the more beautiful world our hearts desire and we all know is possible is worth sacrificing almost anything for. And I want to be a good ancestor, which means trying to find a way to create conditions conducive to life.
That's a wrap. It has been an honor having you on the show, Steph. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andani. It's been really good talking to you. It's been truly wonderful.
Thanks for tuning into our JET podcast today. Before you disembark, don't forget to subscribe and stay connected. For more resources, updates, and ways to take action, visit jetvoices.com. Until our next jet flight, stay inspired, stay engaged, and keep pushing for a just energy transition.